make it quick, because you weigh a lot. What's your name?
Andre.
You read comics?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I read comics a lot.
Oh, he comes.
You want a hug?
No.
Good. You and me, lady, we're gonna hang out, man. We're gonna go cruising. Julie go drive by. It's gonna be chilling. So, man, we're gonna get her.
I was home alone. Actually, I was automobile number 2. My paint design was created by Todd McFarlane and Chance Wood. I was created and lettered by Don Smith and Chance Wood. And a pleasant time.
Very, very big honor to meet you, and to be with you here today and to have you on our show. I'd like to ask you how you got started in creating the famous Monsters of Filmland book.
Well, way back in 1922, I had picked the right pair of maternal grandparents when I was 5.5 years old. The first film they took me to was a fantastic one called One Glorious Day, in which I saw a little spook for the first time. Shortly thereafter, Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces, began making movies just for me: The Phantom of the Opera, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Unknown, The Monster, the lost film London After Midnight. And I was on my way into the world of fantasy. In 1922, I wrote the first known list of fantastic movies, a pathetic little 32 titles, when nowadays we have more than 32 a year. But in 1967, I flew over to London to the World of Science Fiction Convention. Afterwards, had a little free time, went to Paris, and I picked up a movie magazine that had London After Midnight on the cover and King Kong inside, Frankenstein and Dracula. Just got it for my collection, but I met up with a man who was publishing magazines at the time in New York, and he took one look at it, and he was looking for what we call a one-shot, something that would just be in and out, like about the Beatles or Marilyn Monroe. And he could see this whole French publication turning into English, and he thought he could borrow the stills. Well, there were two things against it. All of the photographs were owned by half a dozen different people in Paris who weren't about to send them over to America. So I spoke up, and I said, well, I have 35,000 stills. That was way back in 1967. Now I have 125,000 from all around the world the last 100 years. So he flew out to Hollywood, and next thing I knew, I was sitting with my mechanical typewriter 24 hours a day, practically. He was holding a sign in the air: I'm 11.5 years old, and I am your reader. Make me laugh. So the first issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland came out in February 1958, and it was such a runaway success that before its story was through, I'd done 200 issues of it, and little kids who read it grew up and turned out to be Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and John Landis and Rick Baker, Monster Maker. And John Landis has put me in 6 of his films in cameos. I was President of the United States in Amazon Women on the Moon, and in Michael Jackson's Thriller.
And you've been in dozens of other films, and just in cameos. And
I've been in 54 films altogether. Yeah, I was curator of the last museum on Earth after World War III had destroyed civilization, in a film called Aftermath. And I was in Innocent Blood and Kentucky Fried Movie. And
yeah, you played the president.
President of the United States and Amazon Women on the Moon. The next film hasn't been released yet, called Turkeys in Outer Space. I graduate to President of the World. Then after 2 terms, I'm out of a job, and all I could get was to be a judge in Nudist Colony of the Dead. It was quite a come down from President of the World.
That doesn't sound like such a bad job. So you've inspired dozens of people, actually probably hundreds of people, to get into the horror movie making business. What is your favorite horror film? I know that's probably a very, very hard question.
Not at all, because when I saw Lon Chaney in The Phantom of the Opera, that sealed my my fate. And earlier this year, I have the cape that Lon Chaney wore as the Phantom, and later on Claude Rains inherited when he did the role.
Correct.
And over in Holland, they had a 42-piece orchestra and a beautiful print of the Phantom, and they toured it around the country to 8 major cities, and they had me fly over with Lon's cape and be present at the premiere of it.
That's great. Do you prefer the original Universal Studios films over, say, what's being made today?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Those are classics, the Dracula, Frankenstein, Invisible Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Old Dark House, and so on. I don't see anything that's hardly a touch on them today.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other projects that you're currently working on, books coming out, anything?
Well, I'm doing a new magazine. Years ago I did one called Spacemen. Now I'm doing Space Women.
Mm-hmm. Oh, which is right here, as a matter of fact.
I was just in China recently with an American female astronaut and 3 Russian cosmonauts. And I'm constantly keeping my home open for people to visit. I've had 40,000 fans have visited me since 1951.
Wow.
Recently had 2 sisters from Transylvania and the first female fan from the Azores. And there's just no end to it. I've even had people walk into the house speaking the artificial language Esperanto, which I learned many years ago, and on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the creation of the language, for 10 days I was among 7,000 people from 60 countries, and we could all talk to each other.
Now, you had just told us that you've seen Metropolis
91
times.
Yes.
Why watch that film 91 times?
Well, you have to turn back the clock to when I was 10 years old, and 1927, and movies weren't talking yet, and they were in small screens, and they didn't have color, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a prediction of 100 years in the future, a city of 60 million people, and a fabulous female robot. I've seen that robot burned up 91 times at the end of the movie, and I fell in love with her long ago, so I employed a couple of Hollywood artisans. They spent 1.5 years and 600 hours and rebuilt Ultima Futura Automaton for me.
Oh, wow. You have a lot of artifacts and pieces of horror films and such.
I have the Pteranodon that was trying to fly away with Fay Ray in King Kong. I have life masks of Karloff and Lugosi and Peter Lorre and Vincent Price. I was there the night they made the life mask of John Carradine. I have the last remaining Martian machine from War of the Worlds.
Oh, wow.
And I have Bela Lugosi's cape. He was buried in one. His son has one, and I have the final one that I saw him wearing on the stage in 1932 doing Dracula.
Now, this has a gray lining, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I was talking to a gentleman. They're putting out a Bela Lugosi posable figure that's coming out in December, and they're here at the show, and he was talking about how he was putting the original cape lining color in there rather than the red, so that it would look more realistic.
This is Bela Lugosi's Dracula ring that he wore in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Oh, wow, that is great. All right. Well, speaking about Dracula, I had just heard that they were going to do an entire musical score, and then put this onto the vocal tracks of the original film. What do you think about that?
I really don't know what to think. I assume if they'd been doing musical scores in 1931, that it would have had one, and Frankenstein would have had one. So they're really only kind of time traveling and doing something that is commonplace today. I'm reserving my judgment on that till I see it again and see how it works.
Okay, okay. That sounds like it might be a good thing to do, though, because I've always watched the film and thought about, you know, how the music could build up at a certain point, and I think that might be a good thing. So anyway, well, I do want to thank you, and I want to let you go because you have a lot of fans that want to see you. And we are here at the Resin Heads 2 show at the Holiday Inn in Hillside. And thank you so very much for being with us today.
By the way, I was here in Chicago in 1940 for the second World Science Fiction Convention. Came back to Chicago when they had it for the second time and the third time. And in the year 2000, I'll be back here in Chicago for the World Science Fiction Convention.
Great, great. Well, I'll tell you what, on a closing here, if there's anybody out watching right now that is trying to break into the horror movie business, do you have any words of inspiration for them?
Well, they better, first of all, ensconce themselves in Hollywood, where they have the opportunity to get in touch with the movie makers and join something like the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, and get acquainted with the entire community of horror makers.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us. This is Forrest J. Ackerman, and I'm Victor Lane right here at the Interview 98 show right here for TCI, and we have more coming up.
Yes.